Ready. Thank you, Tammy. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Vaness, and I am an ADR program coordinator from CSBD, Community Support Services in Belleville. Um, and I just wanted to introduce myself as the moderator today. And we are going to listen to a presentation from Kayla Stephenson, and it's called Healing Access Across Generations Through ADR. And this session really examines the influence of intergenerational trauma in diverse communities and its implications for ADR. So through a culturally sensitive lens, participants will explore how historical and systemic traumas shape conflict dynamics. The presentation offers strategies to foster cultural humility, build trust, and support healing across generations while ensuring inclusive practices in ADR. All right, so Kayla, I'm gonna pass it over to you, and I'm going to, when you are ready, I will share your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Whenever you're ready, yeah, you
Okay,
can
when you're
share.
ready.
And so good afternoon to everyone that's joining the session this afternoon. Um, Thank you to my wonderful co-host for that wonderful introduction, and please keep me on time. So my name is Kayla Stephenson. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm honored to be a part of today's important discussions. So this session, Amanda, when you're ready for the
Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry. You just get the thing. Okay.
no problem.
Um, okay. There, share screen. I'll talk myself into it here. All right. Here it is. Here. Okay, share. And I'll just make it bigger. Present.
Perfect.
There. Okay, great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So this session will explore how trauma, especially intergenerational trauma, affects dispute resolution in diverse communities. Some of the information you're going to hear today may have already been mentioned, but this is just an introductory in how intergenerational trauma shows up in our clients. So this afternoon, we'll focus on ADR, how ADR professionals such as yourself can integrate trauma-informed and culturally sensitive practices to better support individuals and families. By the end of this session, I hope you'll feel empowered to foster environments of safety, trust, healing in your ADR work. So let's quickly review our agenda. If you can change the slide there, Amanda, and then change it one more time. So understanding intergenerational trauma in diverse communities, trauma-informed principles in ADR practice, building cultural humility and healing-centered approaches, case studies and practical strategies, and time for questions and reflections, hopefully. I want to remind you all that this is a safe space for everyone and things might get a little heavy, so I invite anyone who needs a break to do so at any time. I will try my best to answer your questions as we go along with the help of Amanda, either aloud or if you put it in the chat. Or if you would like, I may follow up with you after the session. So let's dive in with an icebreaker. So if I can get you to change the slide. And I'm just going to put in the chat a Mentimeter. And I'll just pull up my screen for that. So if everyone can click on the link in the chat. So it's a Mentimeter. And my question is, reflect on one belief or tradition that's been passed down in your family and put it into that Mentimeter. So I'm just going to take a look at it. And when you are thinking of one tradition that's been passed down from your family that you use day to day or traditions, I want you to think about how this has shaped your worldview or your approach to conflict. So I see one answer in the chat or in the Mentimeter: respect. I see golden rule. I see gathering. kindness. Okay. So while everyone is putting in their comments, I have a few. So respect is there. So respect for elders, which is common in many cultures. So one of these beliefs is to always respect and listen to your elders because they have wisdom from experience. So from participants from cultures that emphasize difference to elders may avoid direct confrontation or seek advice from older family members before resolving any disputes. Another one would be don't air family problems in public. So this is seen sometimes in Asian or African or Latinx communities. And that belief is family issues should stay within the family. So some individuals may be hesitant to engage in mediation or any sort of ADR because of discussing problems with an outsider feels uncomfortable or disrespectful. Another one is turn the other cheek. So one of those beliefs are forgiveness is more important, than retaliation. And the impact on that conflict approach is people raised with this belief may prioritize reconciliation over confrontation, even at a personal cost. So thank you all for sharing. There's a few. Sharing, family, love, respect for elders, obedience of culture, lack of trust for friends, love, unity. Thank you for all those comments. There's a few more that I have. So another one is stand your ground. And this is some sort of Western individualism belief that you have to fight for what is right and not back down. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this type of behavior in our ADR practice. And the impact on this type of conflict approach is that this may lead to more assertive or more adversarial approaches to dispute resolution. So thank you all for participating in this. I'm going to, oh, not yet for the slide. So I hope this exercise was able to reveal to you how personal and cultural histories shape conflict styles. By recognizing that beliefs and traditions influence how people engage in disputes, you can now tailor your approaches accordingly. So not everyone navigates conflict in the same way due to differing cultural experiences. And many beliefs are shaped by historical experiences, including intergenerational trauma. So this activity will lead us further into a discussion on how unresolved trauma affects dispute resolution. If I can get you to change the slide there. Perfect. So let's get started. What exactly is intergenerational trauma? So it refers to the psychological and emotional wounds passed down through generations. These traumas often stem from historical events such as colonialism, forced migration, systemic racism, and other forms of oppression and violence. Next slide. Now, trauma doesn't always look the same. It can manifest in distrust of institutions or authority, which we may have heard in the plenary session earlier this morning, conflict or avoidance behaviors within families, emotional numbness or hypervigilance, persistent stress responses, or mental health challenges. In ADR, these trauma responses can shape how parties communicate, how they perceive conflict, and even their ability to engage in resolution processes. So when working within diverse communities, cultural context is critical. Different cultures express trauma and healing in unique ways. For example, storytelling, spirituality, or family-centered decision-making might play an essential role in some communities' healing processes. So as ADR professionals, recognizing and respecting all of these cultural expressions build trust and promote positive outcomes. Next slide, please. So let's consider an example, a family dispute involving land inheritance. The conflict seems straightforward, but becomes tense and resistant to resolution. Upon deeper exploration, we learn that the family's land was seized generations ago by colonial authorities, and their current mistrust stems from unresolved historical trauma. This highlights how understanding intergenerational trauma can reveal the deeper currents beneath the surface level disputes. Here are a few strategies to put principles into practice. Next slide. So the first one is language choices. Use non-triggering neutral language. So using neutral and non-triggering language is essential when discussing trauma, especially in an ADR setting. So some of these examples can include, instead of saying victims of trauma tend to react irrationally, sorry. Individuals who have experienced trauma may respond in ways that reflect their past experiences. And why would you rather say this comment than the first comment that I made? It avoids labeling people such as victims or irrational. It also acknowledges that reactions are shaped by experience rather than being unreasonable. Another example would be not to use would be traumatized individuals struggle with conflict resolution. Instead, you can use language like people who have experienced trauma may face unique challenges in conflict resolution. And why would you say this comment rather than the first comment that I made? It centers the person before their trauma. It recognizes their resilience rather than defining them by their trauma. Another example would be not to use. Historical traumas like genocide, slavery, and abuse continue to harm communities. Instead of saying something like that, you might want to say something like this. Many communities carry the impact of past collective hardships, which can influence present-day dynamics. Why would you rather say this comment than the first one? It maintains awareness of harm without overwhelming participants. It leaves space for reflection rather than triggering distress. Another example, instead of saying something like Western mediation techniques are the best way to resolve disputes. Different communities have diverse approaches to conflict resolution, including mediation, storytelling, and restorative justice. So why would you make a comment like that? It avoids implying that one system is superior. It also honors diverse cultural practices. Another example would be the system is broken and has failed people. So that's an example you wouldn't want to use. Another way of saying that would be many individuals experience barriers when navigating systems, and ADR can help bridge gaps to ensure equitable access. And the reason why you would rather say this phrase than the first one is that it keeps the focus on the solutions rather than reinforcing feelings of helplessness. It encourages constructive dialogue instead of blame. So there are a few other terms that you could change in you could try to change in your vocabulary to enforce your trauma-informed habits. So a big one now is the word victim. Instead of using the word victim, you would want to say something like, this person is impacted by trauma, or this person is a survivor. Instead of using an abused person as a word or a phrase, you would want to say something like the person who has experienced harm. I'm sure some of you have been hearing some of these phrases go around lately. Instead of saying something like broken families, you're going to want to say something like families facing challenges, a high conflict parent, parent navigating conflict, systemic oppression, historical and structural barriers, and neglectful parenting, parenting under difficult circumstances. Using grounding language when discussing trauma might be difficult. If a topic, my apologies, might be difficult for participants, you can frame it with care. A suggestion for that is, next session, in this next section, I will discuss historical trauma. If at any point you need to pause, please feel free to do so. Something similar that I said earlier at the beginning of this session. So number 2, I'm going to go on to the second principle to put into practice. Practice process, my apologies, transparency. So provide detailed explanations about each step of ADR to reduce any uncertainties. Sorry, everyone, I'm trying to get all this information out to you and it's all coming out at the same time. So bear with me. And number 3, trauma-informed questioning. So I'm going to go into some examples for this one. So instead of saying can you explain what happened to you when doing an interview? Instead of saying that, you can say something like, if you feel comfortable, would you like to share anything about your experience? Instead of saying, why didn't you leave the situation sooner? You may want to say, what were some of the things that made it difficult to leave? Instead of saying, did your past trauma cause this reaction? You might want to say something like, would you like to share anything about what has brought you here today? And instead of saying something like, what's wrong with you? You want to say, what has been happening that led you to seek support today? Instead of stating, you should try whatever your solution might be, you might want to state, would you like to explore some options together that might feel supportive to you? You want to avoid blame and shame by saying, why do you keep making the same mistakes? Instead, say something like, what patterns have you noticed in these situations? Instead of stating, you need to move on from this, you might want to state, what do you feel you need in order to move forward in a way that feels right for you? Do you see how those questions that I'm asking the second time are more open and more inviting instead of kind of locked off? That's the type of practice that we should all get into. I do have a lot more examples and I can share them with you at the end of the session or at a later time. So by using this invitational language and removing these judgment pieces and allowing autonomy, these trauma-informed pardon me, approaches help build safety, trust, and empowerment in sensitive conversations. So now we're going to jump into an activity. Next slide. So now I'd like to invite you to think about a challenging ADR case involving diverse participants. What are some of the barriers you faced in building trust? Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. And while you do that, I will take you through a couple of examples that I have. So let's talk about child welfare mediation and Indigenous families. So the scenario is that a mediator is working with an Indigenous family whose child has been placed in foster care. The family has a deep mistrust of child welfare agencies due to historical trauma from the residential schools and the 60s scoop. The Child Protection Agency wants to create a safety plan, but the family feels they are being forced into a process they don't trust. So there's barriers to this trust building. So the historical trauma and systemic mistrust. The family sees that this system as another form of colonial intervention. There's a power imbalance. The agency holds the authority over the custody decisions, making it hard for families to feel heard. The lack of cultural sensitivity. The agency may not recognize Indigenous ways of healing and family structures. So strategies to overcome these barriers would be to incorporate Indigenous knowledge elders or keepers into the mediation, use restorative practices, allow storytelling and traditional practices in the discussion, acknowledge past harms. Recognizing historical trauma upfront builds credibility in this connection. I'm just going to take a look in the chat and take a look to see what everyone's saying. So child welfare's problematic legacy. Yes. So that is a barrier, right? Divorce mediation between an immigrant father with low language skills and a Canadian mother. Yes, you see some power imbalances there. Um, I think I'm just taking a look at the time. I'm going to go through another example. So, a dispute between Children's Aid Society and a racialized family. So, a family involved with child protection services feels that they are being unfairly targeted due to their cultural parenting style, discipline methods, extended family involvement. They believe CAS is imposing Western values on their household. So the barriers to this trust building would be cultural misunderstandings. The family sees intervention as an attack rather than support, and the fear of their losing their children. The threat of child removal escalates and emotions and resistance. There are language and communication barriers. So just like in the chat, there's limited English proficiency or different communication styles that can hinder their understanding. So what you could do to overcome some of these barriers is cultural mediation. So involve professionals from the family's community who understand their background. Reframe the conflict. So emphasize partnership over authority and use trauma-informed language. So avoid legal jargon that might feel intimidating or accusatory, and members of the public or lay people do not understand it. Um, so I'm wondering if those who are here can think of a case where mistrust or where trust was a major barrier, and what steps did you take or could you have taken in order to rebuild the trust? Next slide. So cultural humility is about approaching every interaction with curiosity, respect, and a willingness to learn from the other person's experience. Unlike cultural competence, which assumes one can fully master another culture, humility emphasizes ongoing self-reflection and growth. Next slide. Recognizing bias. We bring our own prejudices and biases to every decision we make. It is important to be aware of them and how they influence us. We must not only recognize our own biases, but also that of the authors and creators of the information that we consume. My apologies, might consume. So it's important to be aware and how of them and how they influence us, but we must not recognize only our own biases. Sorry, I'm just repeating the same thing that's written down. My apologies. So we all carry implicit biases shaped by our personal experiences and cultural conditioning. These biases can influence our responses during mediation or conflict resolution. So to combat some of these biases, we must reflect on our own assumptions, actively listen without judgment, and stay aware of cultural dynamics that may affect communication and conflict perception. Next slide. So let's discuss a few techniques. Restate and validate. Repeat participants' words to show understanding. Clarify. Ask open-ended questions to encourage deeper sharing. Some examples can include, can you share more about what this experience has been like for you? What do you feel is most important for me to understand about your situation? And can you tell me about a time where you felt supported or heard in a similar situation? And also, what do you wish people knew about what you've been through? Other comments can include, how has this situation affected you emotionally? What emotions come up for you when you think about this conflict? What do you need right now to feel safe and supported? Understand trauma and its influence by asking questions like, how do you think past experiences may be shaping how you feel about this conflict? Have you noticed any patterns in how conflict is played out in your family or community? What do you think might help break the cycle of past harm? And what does healing look like for you? You also want to foster trust and empowerment. What would make this conversation feel safe and supportive for you? How can I best support you as we work through this? What do you think would be the most meaningful way to move forward? Also, navigating cultural and intergenerational perspectives. How do you think cultural or family traditions influence the way you see the situation? Have you had experiences with conflict resolution that felt more in line with your cultural values? What lessons have been passed down in your family about handling conflict situations? And are there any community or cultural supports that would help you feel more comfortable? Because we may not know about all of the information or the community supports that are out there. You also want to encourage reflection and growth. Looking back, what have you learned about yourself through this experience? If you could give advice to someone going through a similar situation, what would it be? What personal values are most important for you during this process? And last but not least, acknowledge emotion. Recognize the emotional weight of the participants' experiences as well as your own. And remember, your choice of words matter. Next slide. So to address intergenerational trauma, ADR processes must not only focus on conflict resolution, but also on healing. So let's explore a few techniques. So storytelling. This allows participants to share their histories as part of the process. Restorative practices. So this focuses on repair, accountability, and moving forward together. Collaborating with community resources. So partnering with cultural mediators, counselors, and other community leaders who understand the participants' backgrounds. Do you think there's anything else that you could add to the list? Oh, I see something in the chat that says using our ethno-specific cultural program partners and inviting them to these meetings. It's great, great ideas. So next slide, please. So I have a case study. So my apologies that it's a little small. If you do need to, I tried to get it all in there. If you do need to zoom in, you can do that on your own screen by making me smaller and making the slide a little bit bigger, but I will be reading what's on it. So Jade, a 14-year-old girl from an Indigenous community, has been in foster care for 2 years due to child welfare concerns raised by her school. Her grandmother, Marielle, has been advocating for her return, stating that their family struggles are linked to historical trauma and systemic barriers rather than neglect. So Marielle feels that the child welfare system is another form of colonial control similar to residential schools that took her own siblings. She expresses deep mistrust towards social workers and mediators, believing that they do not understand her family's history or cultural practices. And so the Children's Aid Society is open to exploring reunification, but believes Marielle must demonstrate a structured care plan. The assigned mediator must facilitate a discussion between Marielle, CAS representatives, and Jade's legal advocate to find a path forward. So the key challenges in this case is that there is historical trauma and mistrust. So Marielle's past experiences impact her ability to engage openly. There's a power imbalance. So CAS holds the decision-making authority, making Marielle feel unheard. The cultural sensitivity. So the system, in this example, does not recognize the importance of extended kinship care and Indigenous healing practices. And then there's also emotional barriers. So Jade feels caught in the middle. She's the child, fearing the conflict between her family and the system. So some things I would like the participants in this session to think about is, and you can put your responses to this in the chat or you can just think about them. So next slide. And the next one. Thanks, Amanda. So what trauma-informed strategies would the mediator use to build trust with Marielle? And how can ADR ensure that Jade's voice is centered while respecting family and cultural values? What role can restorative or indigenous approaches play in this mediation? And what steps can be taken to ensure an equitable resolution that supports Jade's well-being? Oh, I don't know what happened there. Oh, thanks so much. So some potential resolutions you can take from this is the mediator can acknowledge historical trauma and validate Marielle's concerns. A cultural liaison or indigenous elder can be included to bridge understanding. Yep, of the voice of the child absolutely can also assist. CAS can commit to exploring kinship placement instead of defaulting to a non-Indigenous roster care. Jade's needs and preferences are prioritized, ensuring her voice is heard in the decision-making process. So that is definitely in the chat there. And a trauma-informed ADR approach shifts from authority-driven decision-making to collaborative problem-solving. And perfect as well, a neutral elder that can come in and support. Thank you so much for those comments. Next slide, Amanda. So we're a little early. So here are a few key points to remember. So intergenerational trauma deeply influences conflict dynamics in ADR. And trauma-informed practices that create safe, empowering environments for resolution. Cultural humility is essential for building trust and fostering healing in diverse communities. Some questions I would like you to take away would be, next slide. In what ways can ADR be a tool for healing rather than just for conflict resolution? And how can you, as an ADR practitioner, balance neutrality with the need to acknowledge historical and systemic trauma in conflict resolution? I want you to take those questions away from this presentation. So next slide. I do have some recommendations for everyone on and the next slide. And on your learning into intergenerational trauma and trauma as well. And I'm sorry it's small, but I will read what I have on the slide. So I have a few books. So In My Grandmother's Hands, The Body Keeps Score, Decolonizing Trauma Work, and Attuned, as well as From Conflict to Community. So those are the books that there's two that I've read already. So The Body Keeps Score and Attuned, as well as so those are the two books that I've read. So I'm going through the other ones, but these are recommended for our community, as well as some articles and research papers. So I forgot to say at the beginning of this, I love to read, I love to do research. So this is definitely my slide here. So intergenerational trauma and cultural healing, as well as trauma-informed mediation, a framework for dispute resolution, and videos and TED Talks. So how trauma is passed down, a TEDx talk by Dr. Gabor Mate, I believe, or I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Dr. Gabor Mate or Métis um, is great if you are looking for trauma-informed information, as well as intergenerational trauma and healing from the National Native American Boarding School and the neuroscience of trauma. So take a look at these, at all of these. Plus, there's more. I have a whole bunch. I just had to kind of shorten it today. Um, and that is it for me. We are a lot earlier than I expected, but there's a few other things that I wanted to mention. So please keep in mind how you feel after our conversation today, and remember to honor that feeling. As you heard this morning and probably throughout the day, the work that you do is very taxing or can be very taxing. So please take care of yourself. Um, so I think in the comments, I saw that some of those examples. So that is what I have packaged for everyone that has joined my session today or that is looking for that information. So I'll be providing all of those examples that you can use in your practice of comments that you should be using in your practice. My slides will not be provided, but I have other takeaways that I will be providing at the end of the session, or if there's anything that specific that you're looking for in my slides, I'm definitely willing to pass those around as well and add them to the takeaways that I have. I want to thank everyone for their time and dedication to creating a more compassionate and inclusive ADR environment. Next slide. I'm happy to connect further or answer any additional questions after this session. I also have a feedback form that I am going to put into the chat because I like to have feedback on all of my sessions on how I can do better or if there's anything that I missed. I would love to hear from you. So I'm just going to put that in the chat, and thank you to those who put some messages in there as well for me. Thank you. And as we're closing up, I want to take this time to an opportunity to thank the hosts of this ADR PD Day, Linda Evans and Amanda Reese, OAFM, Family Group Conferencing, George Hull Center, and the Ministry of Community and Social Services for allowing me to present to you today. And thank you to my wonderful co-host, Amanda Van Ness, for your help this afternoon. I'm giving everyone a few minutes of their back so that you can take some time before our closing session, which I'm very interested in seeing myself. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for attending my session.
Thanks, Kayla. We appreciate it so much. It was a wonderful presentation and a lot to think about, especially around the trauma-informed language and the questions. That was amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. So I will be passing all of the some of the comments that I made. Plus, there was a lot that I didn't say, so that might have eaten up a little bit more of my time. But I will pass that to everyone that has attended this afternoon. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.